I mars gick batteribolaget Northvolt i konkurs och just nu kämpar ståltillverkaren Stega med att säkra sin finansiering samtidigt som utsläppen av koldioxid i Sverige fortsätter att öka. Den gröna omställningen går trögt just nu. Harold Dotville är fransman, baserad i London och chef för den tyska kapitalförvaltningsjätten DWS investeringar i infrastruktur, energi och transport. Han ser inte Northvolt och Stegas kris som början på slutet för den gröna ekonomin.
The problem of Northvolt is that there is only one Northvolt. We would need 10 projects like this if Europe wants really to achieve its strategic goal of having less dependency on Asian manufacturing. So if you want to start manufacturing a microprocessor or solar photovoltaic panels, you need this gigafactory, and you probably need some support from the state, which can come through different methods, like a guaranteed offtake or some support for permitting. So the problem of Northvolt is not that, I understand it has been an industrial problem, so process that was not performing well or did not achieve in the right time. Problem is that you would need 10 projects like this. Industrial failures are bound to happen. How can we have more of these projects in Europe? For Stegra, I think the technology is relatively mature and the industrial process is also much better kind of understood, and we have experience in Europe doing this. So it should be, industrially, it should be a simpler project. It's also a project where you're suffering less from competition from Chinese steel because cost of transport for these heavy goods is probably prohibitive. So I think if it's a funding issue, it can be managed, I'm sure. So, but I think the Stegra is interesting. However, it represents clearly one of the challenges of European policy. We want to have less dependence on Russian gas, and so renewable energy is a key focus, or energy transition. However, it has an extra cost. Are we willing to pay for this? And how can the state support this? If that's the objective, it may impose a percentage of green steel in car manufacturing and so on, which would support the offtake for a company like Stegra. But Stegra, I understand, for the moment, we don't know, but its industrial process is more controlled, so it's more funding. Funding should be available.
So the answer is no. This is not the end of the green economy.
No, I definitely hope not. Now, I've not invested in any of the projects so for our funds. So if we had invested, that would surely be very prudent in investing in another one. So how can we stimulate kind of further investment through mechanism, for example, with the European Investment Bank? We take the first loss on some of these projects. So will there be someone kind of courageous enough and with a good package project to start another project like this? I would hope so.
Do you believe in a green bubble?
I think green bubble is not the right word for the situation today, because I think there has been a green bubble. And for example, investing in renewable developers or if you were a renewable developer from 2018 to 2023, you could sell your business and make a fortune. Now, if you invest in a renewable developer today, you would probably come at a material discount to the valuation you had at that time. That's a conjunction of interest rate, a bit more kind of reluctance from politician and population at large for the cost or the perceived cost of renewable. So the environment is probably less supportive, and kind of entry prices today are really much lower than what they were. Now, power prices are lower too, so it's not an easy sector to invest today. There are some opportunities, but I think it's more post-bubble than pre-bubble. Now the fundamental needs and the growth of the market globally is still very strong. Clearly the US is challenging because of policy changes from the Trump administration. Europe is a bit challenging because of power prices and the perceived too high cost, but globally it's still a very growing and interesting sector.
So critics, especially in the case for Northvolt and Stega, say that governments and public institutions should stay away from these high-risk investments. But can they?
I think there is a clear objective in Europe by the EU and the member states to reindustrialize, whether it's in Europe, or at least with other kind of diversified supply chains, to reduce dependency on Asian manufacturing, in particular from China. So how can they stimulate, if this is the stated objective, and there is value in industrial jobs, it's higher quality job than, say, the service economy. It has an environmental impact also, so there's some pros and cons, but if that's a political objective, how can government support it? Investing directly in projects is a bit challenging, comes with governance issue, with decision of allocation. However, if there is an objective to have green steel, so less CO2 emission, and in Europe, but also protect the production of steel locally, then you can impose norms, kind of a minimum, kind of maximum CO2 emission per ton of steel, or impose locally produced products in a car manufacturing, for example. These are typically the rules that emerging economies in the 70s to 90s had in order to protect themselves from, say, European or US manufacturing. Today, when we have China, which is definitely more advanced from a technology and quality and price perspective in many aspects, in particular on green transition, that may be the type of rules that Europe may want to impose. So having a portion of locally produced product, that will have a cost impact and inflation. You see that with the Trump tariff policy. But that will have also the implication of kind of maybe growing the industrial activity in Europe. So if it is today a policy objective of Europe, how can they support this? Not necessarily through investment, but it could be through ordering some of these kind of locally produced equipment, imposing norms which would support local production.
EU-kommissionen pekade nyligen på att de 27 medlemsländerna behöver investera 60 000 miljarder euro de kommande 5 åren för att nå Paris-avtalets utsläppsmål. Pengar som ska användas till att bygga nya järnvägar, vägar, kärnkraftverk och vindkraftsparker. Och Dotvill ser hur investerarnas aptit på gröna investeringar har återhämtat sig i takt med att staterna höjt kraven och värderingarna kommit ner ordentligt. To reach the climate goals, the EU has to invest 6 trillion euros. Will the public funding be enough for this?
We'd better hope not, because we will see it through our taxes at some point, although it should be a profitable investment over time. I think in general, the policy of the EU is to be a market enabler. Whether they achieve it can be discussed, but so they would want to, for example, use institutions like the European Investment Bank to support projects, but to be a catalyst for private investment. So I think all the policies are really to bring more private capital into this investment, and where we try to de-risk some of these projects. You see it in the renewable space. It started mostly with some support regime like feed-in tariffs, so that the state or the electricity system was paying to renewable producer. And now, in particular in the Nordics, you're in a purely merchant market and where you have contracts with buyers. So the philosophy of the EU is to push towards a more market economy across all segments. So the 6 trillion will not come from fully from the public estate. Our head of research, Richard Marshall, had made an analysis that at least 2.5 trillion would need to come from private sector. So that's still a lot of capital to mobilize.
Mm. And finally, the role for the European Union. The EU is moving quite slowly when it comes to legislation and policies. Is it obviously too slowly, would you say?
It's painful to watch. It's very slow, and because it's built on consensus between, don't even remember how many countries. I'll say 27. So it takes time. It takes time to develop a policy, but it takes time to revert it also. So it gives stability in terms of direction of travel. So for us, like investors in infrastructure, it's a very strong quality, a great strength of Europe compared, for example, to the US administration, where the US administration can revert 100% of the policies of the previous administration. So you've got this continuity and long-term focus in Europe, which is very valuable. Clearly, it's a bit depending on the sector in which you invest. It can be a flow. Now, we need to see how Europe reacts also in kind of under stress. And I think being being brutalized by the Trump administration has led to very strong mobilization, both of member states and the EU. With new policies to support industrial investment, to kind of reduce red tape also, which was a welcome movement, and to mobilize investments. Clearly, we've mentioned the 500 billion fund from Germany. Even France, which has kind of constrained finance, announced a 200 billion investment in AI and digital infrastructure. So that has really been kind of possible after being a bit under perceived threat from the Trump administration. So you can react fast.